Hi, welcome back to The Last Climb. Today's episode is about a married couple who spent $164,000 on a private winter glamping trip beneath Mount Everest. They weren't trying to reach the summit, they just wanted to film the mountain with no one else around. 9 days later, rescuers found their camp abandoned. And 3 days after they disappeared, their final video went live. It was titled Peaceful, 5 out of 5. The question is, what happened between those two moments? It was January 23rd, 2020, and winter had emptied much of the Khumbu. Most people picture Everest in April. In April, the south side is one of the busiest pieces of high ground on the planet. Hundreds of people at base camp. A trail through the Khumbu icefall that a team called the Icefall Doctors builds and maintains for the climbing season. A clinic down the valley with real doctors in it. And hundreds of people moving through the region who might notice when someone doesn't come back. But January is completely different. The climbing season infrastructure isn't operating the way it is in April. Far fewer trekkers are on the trail. Some of the higher tea houses are closed for winter, and the Himalayan Rescue Association clinic at Farish isn't operating. Investigators found no permit matching the operator's advertised winter base camp, or so-called Camp 1 package. Whatever paperwork existed, they found no record of an approved commercial operation matching what had been sold to the couple. The ladders and ropes through the icefall hadn't been installed for the spring climbing season, so Everest's actual Camp 1, higher up at 19,900 feet, wasn't connected to base camp by the maintained route climbers rely on in spring. And that distinction matters, because the place Thad and Olivia were eventually taken was nowhere near the real climbing Camp 1. Their camp sat on a private platform above the normal base camp area, below the icefall, at roughly 18,400 feet. The company simply borrowed the Camp 1 name to sell it. That silence was exactly what Thaddeus and Olivia Rennick, both 48, had paid for. No crowds, no lines of climbers, no strangers in the background of their videos. Just Everest, almost entirely to themselves. Thad, as everyone called him, and Olivia had been married 19 years and lived in Austin, Texas. Thad worked in software sales. He loved planning trips, and he researched everything before he spent money on it. Heli skiing in Canada, Kilimanjaro with a guided group. Colleagues told investigators he believed that if you hired good people and prepared well enough, almost anything was doable. Olivia worked in brand partnerships. She had asthma, controlled with an inhaler. She carried everywhere. And her sister described her as the practical one. The one who read every line before signing anything. No kids. 2 dogs. 1 big trip a year and more outdoor gear than they ever used. Friends told police this particular trip had been Thad's idea for over a year. So here's the first decision, and it's the one everything else grows out of. They picked the off-season on purpose, not by accident, not because a company talked them into a date. Investigators recovered their emails, and the request for winter came from them. Thad's own pre-trip video says it plainly. Everybody goes in April. April is crowded. They were being smart by going when nobody else was there. That belief came from somewhere specific. Investigators found dozens of short clips saved on Thad's phone. An empty, snow-covered Everest with nobody in the frame. Most were traced back to ordinary spring trips. Nothing in the post said when they were filmed, and neither of them asked. The company they booked through came by way of a travel broker and operated as a trekking agency. Investigators were able to verify that much. What they couldn't verify was the paperwork for the operation being advertised. They found no authorization matching a private winter platform above the normal Everest base camp area, with heated accommodations, helicopter-supported logistics, and overnight clients at that altitude. Whatever approvals the company claimed to have, investigators couldn't match them to the trip the couple actually purchased. Their website was archived before it disappeared, which is the only reason investigators could review what it advertised. The package was called Winter Everest Exclusive, and its biggest selling point wasn't the summit. It promised a private platform above the normal base camp area, marketed as Camp 1, even though it was not Everest's real climbing Camp 1. Along with that came heated sleeping pods, helicopter transport in and out, round-the-clock satellite communications, and emergency helicopter support. Investigators compared every promise against the contracts, available registration records, operator paperwork, service agreements, and interviews. The heated pods were delivered. Everything else was incomplete or non-existent. Helicopters could fly clients into the region if weather allowed, but there was no guaranteed way out. The satellite account had never been activated, and investigators found no evidence any helicopter operator had agreed to provide dedicated emergency standby. So they paid $164,000 for a safety net that mostly existed on paper. And yes, they were lied to. Investigators recovered the invoices and the written answers, and from where the couple was sitting, that company looked real. But this is where the second decision comes in, and that one is theirs alone. No license contractor logo turns January into April. What they needed to know wasn't hidden or written in another language. 20 minutes of reading would have told them the climbing route wasn't established for the season yet. The Farish Clinic was closed, services higher in the valley were limited, and January brought a fraction of the people they'd find there in spring. The mountain didn't literally empty out. But the network of climbers, doctors, guides, lodges, and expedition teams that makes April feel populated simply wasn't there at anything close to the same scale. Their equipment tells the same story. Investigators listed everything they brought back off that camp. Nearly $38,000 of brand new winter gear bought in 6 weeks, most of it barely used. What wasn't in the inventory was the boring stuff experienced. People never leave behind closed cell foam pads, a stove running purely on propane, an active satellite messenger, oxygen, and here's the detail that matters most, and it came out of the sales emails investigators pulled from Thad's account. The heated pods had been sold to them as a replacement for foam pads. They accepted that. So they brought no foam at all. Hold on to that, because it comes back. They landed in Kathmandu on January 8th with 9 usable vacation days and an itinerary that promised, in the brochure recovered from their luggage, no wasted trekking days. That phrase is the third decision, and it put their bodies in trouble before the weather ever did. The next morning they flew to Lukla, and a charter helicopter carried them straight up the valley to Gorak Shep at 16,900 feet. 12,300 feet of altitude gain in about 5 hours of flying. The 10 days most people spend walking up that valley aren't a scenic add-on. That's the part where your body adjusts. Your blood catches up to where you're standing, and no piece of equipment does that for you. The guidance above 10,000 feet is 1,000 to 1,600 feet of sleeping elevation a day, with rest days. Investigators noted the couple had specifically asked the operator to compress the schedule so they wouldn't burn vacation days walking. They paid extra to skip the only part of that trip that was protecting them, and people did try to tell them. 3 of them, in fact. 2 experienced guides in Kathmandu turned the job down before the trip left the ground. In separate police interviews, both named the same 2 worries: how high the clients would be sleeping and the fact that there'd be no radio at that camp. The third had no connection to the company at all, a lodge caretaker at Gorak Shep with close to 30 winters in that valley. He told police that on January 9th he asked, through one of the porters, where these 2 planned to sleep. When he heard the answer, on an exposed platform above base camp at around 18,400 feet in January, he told them to sleep lower. Then he said it again. The footage confirms the conversation, so we know he isn't remembering it generously. Thad thanked him, tipped him, filmed him, and then, for about 5 days, it worked. I want to be fair to what's on those memory cards, because it's beautiful. Cold blue mornings with no wind in them at all. The icefall going gold 20 minutes before the sun clears the ridge. A silence you can hear on the microphone. On January 14th, they moved above the normal Everest base camp area to the private platform the brochure called Camp 1. It sat at roughly 18,400 feet on exposed ground below the Khumbu icefall. Nobody forced them up there. They filmed the walk. They were smiling. Meanwhile, and this is the part nobody in that camp was equipped to see, their bodies were losing. Both had been visibly short of breath since the day they flew in, and nothing recovered from that site suggests anyone was keeping track of it. No finger clip for checking the oxygen in your blood, no stethoscope, not one altitude medicine in the whole kit. By January 11th, their own videos show Olivia coughing repeatedly and getting winded on short walks around camp. Everyone treated it as the dry Khumbu cough half the trekkers in that valley pick up every season. Investigators noted those same symptoms can look like the early stages of altitude sickness, and that nobody could ever say for sure which it was. So, I'm not going to tell you. Investigators also noticed, across several days of footage, how little water the 2 of them were drinking for the altitude they were living at. At 18,000 feet, you lose serious water just breathing cold, dry air. Nobody could measure how dehydrated they got. But what's on camera suggested it was one more thing working against them. On January 17th, Weather data obtained during the investigation shows a deep trough crossing the Himalayas. Not a blizzard yet. What collapsed first was the temperature. The daytime high fell from about 9 below to 24 below, and that night it reached roughly 31 below. Almost every comfort at that camp ran on rechargeable lithium batteries. The pods, the jacket liners, the power stations, the cameras. Battery experts brought in during the investigation explained that lithium loses most of its usable power in extreme cold. Several of the power stations they recovered showed the damage you get from trying to charge a battery that's far too cold. Within hours, the pods stopped and the heated clothing stopped. The only camera batteries still working were the ones they carried inside their jackets. That's one reason there's any footage from the final days at all. Then the generator. Recovered video shows it running inside the dining shelter while the couple tried to warm up, and both complained of headaches and nausea. Investigators ruled out carbon monoxide, but the generator soon failed in the extreme cold. So the camp lost its last dependable source of electricity, and neither of the two people paying for that camp seems to have understood what that meant. Then came the problem almost nobody thinks about: water. The investigation found 2 propane cylinders and 12 butane canisters, which sounds like plenty, and wasn't experts explained butane performs badly at those temperatures, which made most of those canisters useless. Going by the fuel they had left, investigators believed that by the evening of January 18th, nearly all their water was coming from snow melted over a small fuel tablet burner, far less than 2 people at that altitude need. Staff interviews showed the other half of the problem. The 6 men at the platform above base camp weren't licensed climbing guides. They were porters and camp workers. None of them carried a radio, none had the authority to call for help, and investigators found nothing at that camp that could have reached anyone anyway. Sometime on January 19th, one of them caught a mobile signal near Gorak Shep and pulled down an updated forecast. Another 15 to 20 degrees down, and several days of heavy wind beginning January 21st. What happened next was pieced together from the staff interviews, the equipment left behind, and the note found at the site. Between roughly 1 and 3 in the morning on January 20th, all 6 men packed their own tents. They took the propane, the working stove, the rope, and their own foam sleeping pads, and started down toward the valley. Rescuers later recovered a handwritten note beneath the camp stove. The crew has gone down for supplies. The weather is turning. Follow the flagged line down at first light. Enjoy the peace and quiet. I've thought about that note a lot, and here's what gets me. It isn't cruel. Investigators believed whoever wrote it expected the couple to be gone shortly after sunrise. In separate interviews, all 6 men said the same thing in almost the same words. They assumed 2 people who woke up alone at 30 below would read that note and start walking downhill. They were wrong, and I understand why. Nothing those clients had done in 11 days suggested they understood where they were standing. So what did investigators believe they actually had left that morning? The marked route from the platform back toward Gorak Shep, 4 to 5 hours for someone healthy whose body has adjusted to the altitude. Longer for 2 exhausted people whose bodies never got the chance, pushing through fresh snow. The last usable light on January 20th was around 5:35. Working back from the daylight, the ground, and the weather, investigators put their safe window as closing around 12:40, so call it 6 hours. That's what they had, and this is the part I find hardest to be generous about. At approximately 6:40 that morning, Thad opened the tent, found the footprints leading away from camp, and found the note. He filmed both. Then, instead of leaving, they went around counting what was left. They set the solar panels out and tried to charge a power station, which investigators later found had suffered permanent cold damage. They tried the camp's espresso machine, and there's a long clip of them discussing whether the operator was obligated to send the helicopter they'd been promised. That's the point where some people laugh, and I don't, because look at what they'd been sold. They read it aloud on camera at 6:40 in the morning, and then spent the entire usable half of a Himalayan winter day on an exposed platform above base camp at 18,400 feet trying to make coffee. The footage and the tracks the recovery team photographed around the site show they finally left camp shortly after 2 in the afternoon, about 90 minutes past the point investigators considered safe. It didn't last. After roughly 900 yards, they turned around, and the recovered video explains why. Olivia had been burying her hands every time she used her phone or camera for days, in conditions where frostbite takes minutes. The autopsy found severe frostbite in both her hands, and on the footage from that afternoon, she can't grip a pole or work a zipper. Thad tried to help, and his own hands were already failing. Investigators called that decision both understandable and tragic. Continuing down might have left her unable to use essential gear. Turning back cost them the only realistic chance to get off that glacier before the weather closed. Both are true, and it wasn't resolvable up there. The medical findings help explain the next 2 days. Hypothermia doesn't arrive. It accumulates. Their food was recovered, frozen, solid, and they had no working stove. Insulation is the other half, and they had almost none, no foam pads, because the pods had been sold as the replacement, and the crew's foam went down the mountain in the crew's packs. January 21st, the wind came exactly as forecast. The weather records put it at 40 to 55 miles an hour, steady, gusting over 70, blowing snow that held visibility under 100 feet through most of the daylight. The flagged line was buried. Descent had stopped being a bad option and become an impossible one. The recovery team found the second tent flattened. One of its poles snapped at the joint under the weight of the blown snow. They also found its outer cover cut loose and tied across the standing tent as a windbreak. Investigators read that as two people still thinking clearly enough to solve a problem. It's the last solved problem in the file. January 22nd is the part I want to handle carefully, and all of it comes off the memory cards. Investigators believe those recordings show the cold working on their minds, not two people making choices. The medical findings back that up. A core temperature between 90 and 82 degrees looks, from the outside, like a person running the last script their brain still has. They'd spent 9 days being customers. When everything else was gone, that was what was left. Neither of them says the word help on any of the 41 recovered files. Late on the 22nd, the evidence points to something the cold does at the very end. Olivia's jacket was open, and her outer shell was off and folded beside her. Between the clothing, the way she was lying, and the autopsy, the medical examiner put that down to what's called paradoxical undressing. Near the end, the blood vessels under the skin open up all at once, and the person feels hot. Not a little warm, hot. So they take their jacket off, with no way of knowing the feeling is backwards. Olivia died between roughly 1 and 4 in the morning on January 23rd. That window comes from the last file her camera recorded and the position she was found in. Once your core drops below about 82 degrees, the heart's rhythm can simply give out. Nothing else has to go wrong. Thad's last file runs 41 seconds. Time stamped 7:12 that morning. He's inside the tent, partly undressed, and he says the morning is peaceful. His speech is badly impaired, and the camera keeps recording after he stops talking. He was found wedged into the narrowest space at the back of the tent under loose fabric, which the report notes is a recognized end-stage behavior in cold deaths worldwide, and not a decision. He died about 72 hours after he read the note. At 8 o'clock that evening, a scheduler pushed the video he'd cut on the 16th. Winter Wonderland Escape. So peaceful. 5 out of 5. It stayed up 4 days. Here's the part that should make your stomach drop, and it's the last decision on the list. What investigators found missing was something much more important. There was no verified expedition registration or oversight arrangement matching the commercial package investigators reconstructed. And when the couple failed to return, there was no official system expecting a check-in or immediately recognizing they were overdue, and their silence was prearranged. Their families told investigators the couple had announced 9 days of digital detox except for scheduled videos, and the scheduled videos kept arriving on time. The one alarm system that protects all of us. Somebody noticing that nothing came. They switched off themselves before they landed in Nepal. On January 24th, Olivia's sister got no reply to a birthday message and read strangers in the comments of the newest video saying the footage looked days old. She called the operator's number. Nobody answered on a weekend. At 11:20 the next morning, she reached the U.S. Embassy in Kathmandu. By then, both of them had been dead about 50 hours. The embassy contacted Nepal police and tourism officials, but investigators found no registered expedition or oversight record matching the operator's advertised winter camp. Before anyone could even begin organizing a search, they first had to determine exactly where the couple had been taken. Knowing they were somewhere around Everest Base Camp wasn't enough. Their actual platform was higher than the normal base camp area, and rescuers needed its precise location. Working out where to send a helicopter took 9 hours. and came down to a credit card statement and a website investigators found had been taken offline that same afternoon. On the 25th and 26th, nothing flew. Recorded wind at Lukla was over 45 miles an hour with severe turbulence through the valley, and pilots refused correctly. A ground team from Namche would have needed 3 to 4 days. On January 28th, the weather cleared. At 9:50, a helicopter flew over the platform above base camp. One tent standing, one collapsed, no tracks, no movement. The pilot didn't land because drifting snow made the surface impossible to judge. A second flight that afternoon dropped 2 Sherpa recovery specialists roughly 800 feet below the platform, and they reached it at 3:05. They didn't recover the bodies that day. Both were frozen in place, daylight was going, and forcing a frozen body free damages evidence. On the 29th, both were flown out beneath the helicopter in 2 lifts and taken through Lukla to Kathmandu. And the hard truth is this. After about noon on January 20th, there was no moment when anybody could have reached them. Not because of cost, not because their insurance was void, not because anybody lost their nerve. Nobody knew they were there, and the weather that killed them grounded every aircraft that could have flown. This wasn't a rescue that failed. It was a rescue that never had a chance to begin with. The autopsies were done in Kathmandu on February 1st and 2nd, after the bodies were thawed under controlled conditions. Both died of hypothermia, with severe dehydration and deep frostbite contributing. The report is honest about what it can't do. Freezing and thawing a body hides small details in the tissue, so cold deaths get confirmed mostly by ruling everything else out. That's what happened here. No serious injuries, no fall, no avalanche, nobody down a crevasse, no carbon monoxide anywhere near a fatal level. The 3 nights they spent alone up there ran about 33, 34, and 36 below, with steady winds of 40 to 55. Brutal, but not unusual. An ordinary bad January at 18,400 feet. The mountain didn't do anything special to them. On February 4th, the operator's owner was arrested in Kathmandu, accused of operating outside his license and misleading clients. The registration was revoked, and 4 more winter bookings, 4 more couples were canceled. Nepal's Department of Tourism also tightened its rules. Any paying group sleeping above 17,000 feet in winter now had to register with a government official. They also had to name someone responsible for calling a rescue, with the money for it arranged up front. 6 weeks later, the pandemic shut the spring season, and those rules went largely untested for 2 years. And everything that might have saved them was cheap. Foam pads, propane instead of butane, a satellite bill that got paid, one person in Kathmandu with their names on a clipboard. An afternoon of reading about what winter means up there. It wasn't the mountain that cost them. It was assuming the hard part had been taken care of by somebody else. There's a photograph on Thad's camera time-stamped 6:41 on the morning of January 20th. It's the note, still clearly readable. Enjoy the peace and quiet. And there's one from January 16th, the last picture either of them took on purpose. The 2 of them with the icefall glowing gold behind them, smiling in matching parkas, 7 days out. Olivia's sister spent 4 days trying to get a video taken down while she waited for news from Kathmandu. She said the hardest part wasn't the call from the embassy. It was reading the comments under that video, where people kept saying how amazing the trip looked. Thad and Olivia Rennick, both 48, died of hypothermia on January 23rd, 2020. In the weeks that followed, the operator's owner was arrested on accusations of misleading clients and operating outside the scope of the trip that had been sold. The company's registration was revoked, its remaining winter bookings were canceled, and Nepal tightened oversight for commercial groups staying at high altitude during winter. For Thad and Olivia, those changes came too late. So if you're planning something this year and somebody tells you the hard part has already been taken care of, ask one more question. Ask who's actually going to be there if it hasn't. Thanks for being here. And hey, take care of one another. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and click like. And what the hell, go ahead and subscribe. You're already here. You want to comment about it? Go ahead, leave a comment. I love talking.